is a springtime rain to have a friend right in your corner. Your heart will feel a little warmer. Tender loving care, tender loving care. Each warm and friendly touch lets someone know you care so much. Tender loving care, tender loving care.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Greenbrier Almond, and thank you for joining us on our program, Tender Loving Care. Each week on Channel 3, we are happy to talk about this interface between Christianity and medicine. And tonight I'm going to tap into some of the early colonial wisdom, the wisdom of America, and share with you some thoughts from a founding father, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was actually probably the oldest founding father, and he was a printer and writer and renowned before some of the later fathers of our country, like Thomas Jefferson and others, were even born. But we owe a lot to Benjamin Franklin, and I hope by sharing this tonight, you'll gather an interest and wet your whistle so that you might also turn to his autobiography, which is a classic way that we teach children how to write a diary and to think thoughts that will enlarge their life and expand their mind. I know that when I was a young man, I was introduced to the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, and I remember Lynn Westfall, my English teacher in the 11th grade, had me read that, and it changed my life. Benjamin Franklin there said he's going to write in his diary not about another person, that's a small type of diary, not necessarily about a place or an event that's going on, but rather about an idea. And he would write about a new idea every day. You start to think about this, that's 365 ideas a year after year after year, and he would try to think a thought through and develop it. And out of that, his mind was ever active, and he, of course, lived to be an older man, and he solved a lot of problems for America. Some of the things happened, some of the things didn't happen. For example, he did not want the bald eagle to be the symbol of our nation. He thought that this was a rogue bird. It was eating other birds' food and wasn't as interesting of a bird as a turkey. He wanted the turkey to be the American bird. And of course that didn't happen, but it's an interesting thought. He thought it through all the way. Well, tonight I'm going to share with you some thoughts from Benjamin Franklin, make comments about that as to the interface between Christianity and medicine. You'll see a lot of scripture in his wit and wisdom. And of course, he was known as a person who had health at the center of his interest. One of his sayings is well known: early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And there are many, many thoughts that he addresses that are related to health and vitality. And of course, medicine was not the same as it is now with a lot of medicines, but still, the foundation is the same. We have to get our exercise, we have to eat right, we have to get the rest. Those things Benjamin Franklin knew. Well, let's go into this a little bit, and I'm going to share, I don't know how many proverbs, how many wit and wisdoms I'll be able to share from Poor Richard's Almanac. By the way, this is interesting too. He followed a lead. There was a Robbins Almanac in England, and so Poor Richard was an American version of that idea of an almanac. He claimed not to be Richard, that he said Richard was someone else, and that he was just the printer of the almanac. And he did that in order to separate himself a little bit from some of the arguments that may develop over some of the advice that Poor Richard's giving, or maybe some of the weather news that didn't come about. I mean, our weatherman is having a rough time now, isn't it? We're probably all upset with him for predicting all this bad weather that we're getting, all the snow, all the zero temperatures, and that type of thing. And so in the almanac, Benjamin Franklin said, I'm just the printer of this almanac, and Richard's the one who writes it. And he kept that dichotomy going. So very interesting concepts that he talked about. Well, let me share some of the wit and wisdom, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I have. And by the way, this was a gift from my son, Roncevert Almond, who has inherited my interest in reading the early American fathers, but Ronce has carried it one more step as he's a historian and an attorney, and of course he's interested in constitutional law and the foundation of America much more than I could ever be. Well, I've been married successfully, I believe successfully, for 38 and a half years, and so I'll start with some comments he made about wives. I think it's a good place to start for a man, and even if one is not successful, he can learn something from Poor Richard and from Benjamin Franklin about marriage and about wives. For example, a good wife and health is man's best wealth. A good wife and health is man's best wealth. That's true. What is wealth? I mean, if you had a car, let's just say, which people invest in, or a house, which people invest in, that's the type of wealth. Could be over in a day, couldn't it? A house could burn down, a car could wreck, so forth. But if you have good health, you have something. If you have a lifelong companion that's you're faithful to, she's faithful to you, you truly have wealth. You have a lot going for you. So I think that's a good statement. He that must thrive must ask his wife. And again, having been married for a long time, I know it's better to talk things over with your wife. You want to thrive, share ideas back and forth. Because it's a two-way street. The wife can, of course, share her ideas with her husband. And it's you see this a lot at the highest level. We always are interested in the President of the United States and his wife, and the mothers of the presidents. All of these women are quite remarkable people. So to thrive, Benjamin Franklin says, you must ask your wife. A man without a wife is but a half a man. And there's something to that too. So those are ideas that he has about wives. Widows, of course, some men, and you see this in a place like Buchanan, older people retiring, living here out their lives. Unfortunately, the men often die earlier, so we're left with widows. He said of widows, he said, rich widows are the only second-hand goods that sell at first-class prices. And there are some widows who remarry. That's what he's getting at there. The weatherman, we've talked about the weather. This is a good one, too. He says, although it was I who made the almanac, he's speaking as Richard here, the Lord God made the weather. So he's letting God take some of the blame there. So the War on Independence, he's the founding father. Benjamin Franklin's the founding father. What did he think about what we did? He said, we are fighting for the dignity and happiness of human nature. Glorious is it for the American to be called by Providence to this post of honor. It was a very high endeavor, wasn't it, to declare liberty, to have government of the people, by the people, for the people. And our cause, he says, is a cause for all mankind. We are fighting for the liberty of all as we are defending our own. So it was a very noble cause. And people would have given up without Benjamin Franklin. He was well respected. Later on, he became the first minister to France, who helped us gain our independence. And of course, later on, he observed and helped make peace with the English. So a very powerful person. A vocation. He that hath a trade hath an estate. I serve on the school board, and I know that we want to be training up our young men, our young women, to have a trade. Of course, they can get their partial education through high school, and then actually to get a trade often requires going on to at least 2 more years of school in some field or another. Not necessarily 4 years of college, but a lot of people probably should be thinking in this market, in this day and age, as Benjamin Franklin taught, have a trade, of course, have a lifelong pursuit of knowledge, and continue to get education. About being busy, again, he calls us to industry, to not be lazy, not to sit around. He said about visitors and being busy, a busy man has few idle visitors, To the boiling pot, the flies come not. It's a good observation. To the boiling pot, the flies come not. Of course, he has other observations like this. He said that you'll get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. But I would gather that, and certainly in our home, I had friends who came to visit. My mother and father had us do chores. We invited our friends to do the chores with us, and the caveat for us would be that we can't play till we get the chores done. And so if the friends help us, then we can go play sooner. And there were some who would go along with that. Some would not come back. They didn't want to visit where they had to do work. And Benjamin Franklin's recognizing that a busy man has few idle visitors. A visionary. The eye of the master will do more than both his hands. There are people who think a lot, and they're actually the highest paid people in our nation, aren't they? Those inventors, those people who come up with ideas like computers. We of course reward them with wealth. And the eye of the master will do more than both his hands. People can work with their hands, of course, and do well too. But he likens it that the eye of the master, the one who does the thinking, will be more successful. Venereal disease. As a doctor, I'm interested, of course, in all diseases, but venereal disease is particularly a plague on our time, isn't it? Gonorrhea is the most common infectious disease we have in America. And of course, we have AIDS, the human immune disease now that's plaguing so many people. And this is spread, of course, through sexual acts. So he says of venereal disease, against diseases, here the strongest fence is the defense virtue, abstinence. And doctors say that to each other and to our patients. You know, if you are true to one person, you will not get a venereal disease. If you abstain, you'll not get a venereal disease. So doctors continue to follow the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin, even in something like venereal disease. He loved Scotland, and he talked a lot about that would be the country he would live in. But the Scottish people are known for thrift and for saving, and he has comments about that too. And I enjoy these as much as any. A shilling, of course, a shilling is, we don't have that anymore. We have pennies, nickels, dimes, and so forth. But you might say a quarter spent idly by a fool may be picked up by a wiser person. Interesting, by the way, I don't think people are picking up pennies anymore. I don't think they're worth very much at all. My observation being that if I see them lying around, I still pick them up, but that no one else seems to be picking them up, and maybe it's just not worth it to pick them up. And of course, the shilling is something that at that time people would sometimes not pick up. He's getting at that. Okay. Saving is very important. Spare and have is better than spend and crave. So he urges saving. Spare and have is better than spend and crave. The other thing we have happening to us from a doctor's standpoint is a epidemic. We might say an epidemic of obesity. In West Virginia, perhaps 30%, 35% of the people are obese at this time. Even children are heavier and heavier. And he writes about temperance. Poor Richard has advice about temperance. He says, eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. I know how to eat to dullness. I've done that before at Christmas or Thanksgiving. It's not a good feeling, is it, to eat so much that we can hardly think at all, or need to go take a nap. He says, don't do that. And of course, drink not to elevation. Some doctors are still debating how much alcohol is acceptable. Apparently, a glass of wine is acceptable. Of course, you can get the same benefit for the heart and other organs of the body through grape juice, but in any event, don't drink to elevation, he is saying. There's wisdom in that. I love teachers. I'm happy to be on the school board again. I've mentioned that, and we esteem highly our teachers, and each of us have a favorite teacher. But he says of teachers, talents for the education of youth are a gift of God. And I think that's true. When you think about the excellent teachers we have in our community, some of them are gifted. It just is a talent that cannot be educated, though they have discovered, that as they went through college and went through school, that's what they wanted to do, and then they studied it and they become better at it and proficient. But it truly is a gift from God, and we are very, very fortunate with the quality of teachers that we have. Some of these quotes that Benjamin Franklin has are very familiar. We just don't know that they came from Benjamin Franklin. Regarding taxes, and I'm taking advantage of this cold weather and having to be inside longer than usual to work on the taxes. We all have to get our taxes ready. April the 15th is coming. But Benjamin Franklin said, "Nothing is certain but death and taxes." That's a very familiar quote, especially you'll see this once or twice every year as we move toward tax day, April 15. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. Benjamin Franklin said that first. Of course, some people talk and don't work. There are talkers. Well, we've all known about people who talk more than they do. But he says the greatest talkers are the least doers. So he's getting at the wisdom of being a doer. Well done is better than well said. Likewise, doing things. Talent. The used key is always bright. We all have talents. Jesus taught about this and said that he told the story of the man who gave the men were employed under him talents. This was a large amount of money, apparently about the amount of money that might be given to someone for a year's wage. But it's interesting that they called it a talent because based on talent, we pay people today, don't we? Highly skilled people are paid more. And though we don't have a coin named a talent. But the idea of talent is to have something that we develop, a gift that we develop that's useful for mankind, and then we market ourselves, and we are happy to do that. So this is a nice thing. The used key is always bright. If someone is at a lock and they're always unlocking the same lock and they use it with the same key, that's bright. If you are typing on your computer now, the computer key that's used all the time will be worn. I have some of mine that are worn on my microwave. The 30-second button is worn because I'm heating my coffee. But he says here, the used key is always bright. Getting at two thoughts. One, of course, the wit and wisdom is that if you use your talents more, you develop them more. But the used key is always bright. Actually, you when you develop something, use it more and more, then it actually serves you better. You get better at it. There was a study several times over the years I've mentioned the tipping point, and that book I once talked about on this program. But everyone who's ever been successful, according to the tipping point, and the concept that develops, has spent at least 10,000 hours developing that talent. So people don't be discouraged. If you're going to school and there's 2,000 hours in a year, and even if you were working at that 24 hours a day, you're still going to be at that 10 years before you develop yourself to your peak. Of course, if you spend half your time working on your talent or your job, that would be 20 years before you get to your peak. And we esteem highly, for example, again, teachers who've been teaching for 20 or 30 years. They're often the best teachers because they know so much. Medicine is a profession like that, where we speak about the practice of medicine, people getting better as the years go by. And in some ways, I don't know all the facts I knew when I graduated from medical school, but after working for some 40 years as a physician, I'm a better doctor than I was when I began. So, likewise, then we want to think about applying ourselves and developing our talents. Here's one that we know to be true. I quoted this at the beginning of the program regarding sleep. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A common quote. We may not know it comes from Benjamin Franklin. We always are trying to simplify our life, and I like this one regarding simplicity and sincerity and being true to ourselves. The word simplicity, Benjamin Franklin says, is not always meant as folly or ignorance, but often it means pure and upright in nature, free from artifact, craft, or deceitful ornament. So if we simplify, we can just get down to the truth. And that's, remember the M Squad, the TV program that was early on our TVs in the 50s, there was the line there, just the facts. And that we sometimes want to simplify things, don't we? And we need to. Security, a lot of emphasis on security. And so people may be curious about the wisdom of security. Love your neighbor, but don't pull down the hedge, he says. And good fences make good neighbors, Robert Frost said. So we get variations of proverbs that deal with security and with being a good neighbor. Love your neighbor, but don't pull down the hedge. So there's something to that, isn't it? Where we do have boundaries. In psychiatry, the practice of medicine that I specialized in, we see people who have ignored boundary issues. They do get too close to people. They get in other people's faces, and then they lose their job, or they're not liked. Then they come to figure that out. Or some boundary issues are more than that. We can't steal from one another. There's clear boundaries as to what is private property, and we can't live in our society if people don't respect those boundaries. So security comes a long way, and maybe at the crudest stage would be having a good hedge. In the Bible, it speaks of having a hedge of protection, God Himself protecting us, a hedge of protection. Some of these are quite familiar to us about savings. Again, sometime in 2006, I believe, we, as a nation, we stopped saving. We are now spending more than we save. No one, there might be an individual watching this program who's saving, but we as a nation are collectively spending our savings. We are, in the old farmers' nomenclature, eating our seed corn, and this cannot do. This will be a route to poverty. Well, about savings, Benjamin Franklin said, "A penny saved is a penny earned." Quite a familiar bit of wisdom, but something that has lasted through the ages for us. A man may, if he knows not how to save as he gets, keep his nose to the grindstone. So there are consequences for not saving. People are going to have to work harder, aren't they? They'll have to work longer. Already there are people my age, which is traditional retirement age, 65, and now 66 for myself, who are working. And I puzzle at it. I ask them the question about it, and I'm still working part-time out of my own interest to do that, but the people who don't have savings have to do that, just to pay the rent, to have food on the table. The Social Security, the money they may have for retirement, will not sustain them because they have not had savings. Another one on savings, when the well is dry, they know the worth of water. When the well is dry, they know the worth of water. So if you don't have something, then you realize the true value of it. Have time for several more here. One would be retirement. There are times in which the post of honor is a private station. So he talks a lot about honor. When one is elected, it's an honor. I certainly have felt honored to be on the school board, and I understand the use of that term at that time. Retirement, he says, a post of honor is a private station. So people then would leave working for other people. They would go to a private station. They would not be idle, but they would be doing what they wanted to do, have hobbies and interests. And anyone who has retired, I'm sure if they plan ahead, they plan a schedule and treat it as if they are going to work, but they work at their hobbies, they work at their interest. They have the honey-do list. The wife helps them out. And many people tell me it takes them 8 months or a year just fixing up their house, things they neglected to do for a long time. But when they retire, they spend a long time getting their house in order and things of that nature. Religion. I want to maybe be closing on this, but there's differences, of course, between spirituality and religion. But as a topic, the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin goes along the line of spirituality. Wise men wonder at the present growth of infidelity. And so we do, don't we? We pause and say, what will become of us if we don't stay true to our vows? If someone promises till death do us part, what happens to our society if people don't obey that vow? It certainly gives pause, doesn't it? Benjamin Franklin thought about it. Many have quarreled about religion that never practiced it. And that's true, too. There are people, and I get into debates, or try not to get into debates, but I feel drawn into them at times to defend some religious principle or another that someone wants to debate. And in fact, the person I'm talking to is not particularly interested at all in practicing whatever side it is, whether it's to tell the truth or not to tell the truth, or whatever the principle is that they're trying to debate. They're not actually practicing it themselves. And Benjamin Franklin gets at that too. This is why I enjoy reading Benjamin Franklin, why I'm lifting it up to you tonight, that things like this cause us all to think and reason and be better people for it. Here's another one on religion. If men are so wicked with religion, what would they be without it? I recall the statement someone made to me, well, we have a lot of churches in Upshur County. And they're right. You could probably count 60 churches in Upshur County, maybe more. It depends on, how you count the house churches, the smaller churches, and so forth. But we have many churches. But we're not above being without some wickedness. But what would we be without the 60 churches? That's what Benjamin Franklin's saying. Not like this one, though we don't have lighthouses here, because we're not on the coast, but we've had fire towers. We've had the fire towers in the past, and we understand the concept of lighthouses. But he says, lighthouses are more helpful than churches. And in some instances, that's true, isn't it? But we all individually can be a light to someone else. When we do become a spiritual person, we have a light inside of us. The Holy Spirit indwells us. The Spirit of the living God is present with us. And the pictures from the Middle Ages, when they pictured Christ or one of the disciples, they often would have a halo of light around them, and that suggests the principle of light. Lighthouses are more helpful than churches, says Benjamin Franklin. Well, much more could be stressed, and it would be fun to talk about this at some length. I certainly have been enjoying this gift from my son, but it's taking me back to when I first was introduced to the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And if you have a young person and they need to read something this winter, maybe we're going to have more school days, snow days, and cold weather days, Benjamin Franklin's writing, or certainly the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, is a good place to begin. Well, until the next time, this is Dr. Greenbrier Allman thanking you for joining us on our program, Tender Loving Care. Special thanks to Channel 3 for this opportunity to come your way each week. We'll see you next week.
Stories of a West Virginia Doctor, written by Dr. Harold D. Allman. A collection of 55 short stories about his experience as a small-town doctor in central West Virginia. And Tender Loving Care. Stories from a West Virginia Doctor, Volume 2, written by Dr. Greenbrier Allman, using videotapes to write 70 additional stories of his father's very colorful life as a small-town doctor. They can be found for purchase at Amazon.com and most local bookstores. Tune into Channel 3 Buckhannon for Tender Loving Care with Dr. Greenbrier Allman, where he talks about the connection between Christianity and medicine.